Hi and welcome to Bernama World. I'm Jared Ratnam. At a time of growing geopolitical uncertainty, strategic dialogue has become more important than ever. Now, for 39 years, the Asia-Pacific Roundtable has brought together policymakers, diplomats and experts to discuss the region's most pressing challenges. Today, we look at why these conversations still matter and what it means for Malaysia or us as we navigate an increasingly complex landscape globally. Now, joining me is DATUK Professor Dr. Muhammad FAIZ ABDULLAH, the Executive Chairman of the Institute of Strategic and International Studies here in Malaysia. Dato', thank you so much for taking time off to be with us. I know there's a lot happening with regards to your big day out tomorrow in Kuala Lumpur or in the Federal Capital. And I'd just like to start by getting your thoughts on the Asia-Pacific Roundtable, now in its 39th year. Why do you think it has remained relevant for so long?
Yeah, perhaps first a quick introduction to the trajectory of this roundtable. Now, it started off like just about 30 to 40 participants 39 years ago.
39 years ago, 30 to 40
participants. Yes, and now you're looking at a tenfold increase at any time, 400 and beyond. So what we're seeing is that this gradual increment could be attributed to one basic factor. And it is that we remain relevant to the topical currency of geopolitics and geoeconomics. We enable questions to be asked which may not be asked in certain official fora or conferences. Track 2 diplomacy is its net nature. So we keep on making ourselves relevant by providing the opportunity to, as it were, enter into the lion's den, prepared to take questions which may not be seen to be suitable or otherwise too sensitive. That is the nature of the relevance.
Right. Would you like to expand for us for those of us who are not in the know, what is Track 2 diplomacy?
So Track 2 diplomacy basically involves quote-unquote unofficial levels of communication, unofficial levels of driving linkages in discourses, in relations dealing with perhaps not so ministerial or not so governmental types of relations. So that area forms Track 2. That would,
an example perhaps?
An example would be Track 2 in relation to how we could convene meetings among people who are in the think tank business or even people along the ambassadorial lines to focus on a particular issue and prepare the necessary strategic briefs later that could be passed on to Track 1.5 or Track 1, which is the official government line. So there is this level of very healthy, vibrant communication and exchanges among the practitioners of Track 2 diplomacy, and they would definitely include entities like us, like think tanks and other organizations. That's Track 2 diplomacy.
Would this year be different, taking into consideration this being the 39th one, and Malaysia hot off the heels of being the chair of ASEAN? I'm sure there's a lot more to bring to, a lot more to talk about, a lot more conversations to be had this year.
Yeah, well, you mentioned ASEAN in the sense that it is passé, but it is still very relevant. Yeah, because Malaysia, as you know, was the chair last year and we did a significant job. It was a tremendous success. Thanks very much to basically, of course, the leadership that we have, and also to the foreign ministry as well, and also down the line, Track 2 diplomacy. There were many things that were achieved for Track 2. But this year, the APR continues to go on to its basic business, which is to foster greater discourse on issues that are of current relevance to us. You mentioned earlier in your introduction about the uncertainty. Yeah, that would be one of the things that we'll be looking at, the flux of nature of things, how we could generate that discourse, zoom in on the issues, ask questions that may not be suitably asked, and elicit perhaps even inconvenient answers to that.
Now, I mean, like you said, there's quite a few things happening around the world as we speak, We've got so many issues, so many wars that need to be stopped at this point. There's a supply chain crisis. That's one of the biggest problems we have around the world now. And in your opinion, what are the main global issues Malaysia or we as a collective should be looking at right now?
There's some very, very basic issues.
Basic issues?
Yes, some basic issues. These basic issues because they affect not just the area where the conflict arises, but it spreads over. Basic in the sense that it involves energy, it involves food prices, inflation, it involves shortages, it involves how people who may not be even in any way associated with the areas of conflict become in that sense victims of circumstances. You mentioned, for example, in the case, what we have now, for example, the current crisis in relation to the Israel-US-Iran war, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and therefore the energy crunch that came along with this, and what are the expected further consequences if, and by all indications, it's not going to end soon if it persists further. Those are basic in the sense that they impact on the people at the end of the day. So it's not something you divorce it as in the area purely of geopolitics or even geoeconomics, but even to the domestic economy. There are other issues involved with that. Of course, we are currently dealing with the question of, for example, food shortages, how that would impact. And surprisingly, unknown to many, in relation to the energy crisis, it involves, for example, things like even fertilizers. And in an economy where agriculture and food security becomes one of the major issues, that impacts directly on how we could deal with it, the situation.
So every time we have a conversation of this nature, when we talk about global issues, especially in Malaysia or within the region or around the world, we always look at it from a perspective where, when I'm speaking to you, it needs to, I just feel that we're speaking into echo chambers most of the time, and a lot of these drive back home. So if there's something happening around the world or in the region, without the collective or the people of that nation knowing what's happening outside, how do they get a sense of what's, how it affects them, their livelihoods on a daily basis? Do you think we've made these conversations happen and not preach to the choir?
Well, first of all, you mentioned echo chamber. Now, the purpose of APR, the very existence, is not to be an echo chamber, in the sense that we are just going to be recycling topical issues where people already more or less know the answers, or where the participants are reading from, confined and prescribed scripts. So echo chamber is out of the question. In fact, we do not want to be merely echo chambers, although we are in touch with relevant issues. What happens is that in conferences like what we have in the Asia-Pacific Roundtable, is that we zero on the issues that need further questioning. For example, people talk about Strait of Hormuz, but then there's Strait of Malacca. There's also South China Sea. And there it impacts into issues of geopolitical major power rivalry, conflict or tensions between China, the United States, over suzerainty, over protection, over issues like, the UNCLOS, freedom of navigation. Those are things that we will try to pursue, to discuss, and try to fathom where it's going or how it's going wrong. These questions may be dealt with at the negotiation level among the top officials, but at the track 2 level, we stoke the fire of discourse. We get perhaps maybe even clearly opposing sections to be at the table to discuss issues. Vietnam on one hand, China on the other, the Philippines on the other, to kick up all these issues in relation to that.
So at track 2, would it be suffice to say that it's easier to have conversations that usually cannot be had? Say for example, if we're talking about Myanmar, we needed to have more conversations about Myanmar last year, but it's really difficult taking into consideration where we are as a nation our foreign policy, which I'm going to come to shortly, the way we want to treat our neighbors and we want to be friendly with everyone, these things come into play. So having said that, with what we're doing right now, do you think with Track 2 having conversations of this nature, it opens up a lot more areas for people to change and work on different frameworks and also solutions?
I think that's precisely the area I think you've zeroed in nicely. Since you mentioned the difference between Track 2, I can give you Track 1. Yeah. Well, we recently just finished the summit in Cebu, the ASEAN summit. Now, the Philippines being the chair. The question that was discussed in relation to Myanmar was rather muted, in the sense that these were the official lines taken by the various ASEAN member states. They did not go beneath the surface because that was not the nature. Now, you move that further now, we have questions dealing with Myanmar at the Track 2 level. I don't want to kind of like spoil the plot here by, spoil the story. There will be some very intense discussions that we're going to have, both at the APR proper section, as well as we will have a caucus as well, which is to close members of APR practitioners and think tank practitioners, where we'll go far deeper into the discussion in relation to the Myanmar issue, the question of participation and dialogue, not just with one side, but ensuring that we have with all the sides concerned, and how we could formulate that as a sort of a strategic brief to our respective governments as an advisory from Track 2. So there you have penetrated instead of at the official level, to the Track 2 level.
Now, with what I said earlier on about where we are as a country, how should we as a country position ourselves in an increasingly divided world? Look, we're friends with China, simply said, we're friends with China, we're friends with America, we're friends with everyone, but it always goes back to, everyone's eyes are on you all the time. If everyone's your friend, then if you trade too much with this country, country A will not like it. And there's a balancing act here. Sometimes we're walking on eggshells. So how can we better position ourselves as a nation?
We do have a certain paradigm here in terms of foreign policy. I think you're looking at 3 fundamentals. I think the first one is what we call an active non-alignment policy. Active in the sense that we continue to actively engage with all relevant parties. Non-aligned as we are being not committed or stuck or allied to any specific entity, geopolitically, in that sense. So it is active non-alignment. So how do we pursue that? We pursue that according to the ways that we are used to, according to the fundamentals that we have. You mentioned just now the rivalry in terms of the Sino and US. True. The point, in fact, is that China is the biggest in terms of trade with Malaysia. But at the same time, the US is pretty strong qualitatively in terms of, foreign direct investment, especially on the technology part. We will deal with both entities at arm's length in the best way that it can benefit us. So that's the active non-alignment. Right. We are not stuck to any blocks.
Right. I don't know if I'm going to digress, but whilst you're talking about this, and sorry for interjecting, people are divided on this when it comes to the way we deal with other countries, especially on the Gaza issue. In your opinion, and I don't know if you can fill us in on this, do you think our stance on Gaza has hampered economic chances with certain nations?
Good question. No. The question is, we continue to maintain strong principles when it comes to this. So that's why we are vehement in our position in relation to the situation in Gaza, the genocide. The government has spoken very strongly. The Prime Minister has been among the most vociferous in calling out, the genocidal campaigns, the bloodletting, not just in Gaza and Palestine, also, in Lebanon and so on. So that is something which is on principle. But that has not stopped, for example, the investments and the close economic relations coming in from the United States. You see, diplomacy has to be conducted at a practical level. Geopolitics is the art of the possible. It's not about making enemies. And certainly we are friends. Barring a few here and there, we are friends to everyone. So we must continue for that. We are, after all, a trading nation. It's not for us to stand on such a moral high ground in the sense that we decide we will not trade with certain people because they take a certain position in relation to international trade, like I say, barring a few. Hence, while we still contain very, very strong relations in terms of trade with China, our position with the United States continue to be constant and on the upward trajectory. And now, if I may add to the question of foreign policy, the second fundamental is important too. And it's related, in fact, very much to what you were asking just now. We have what we call progressive multilateral policy in terms of trade. In other words, we take all avenues possible, or the principal level is to engage in trade with everyone. That will be of benefit both ways. And that may even include going into minilaterals, initially like BRICS, for example, which is now getting to be a multilateral situation. Why? Because we need to diversify our resources and our trading partners for sustainability avenue. Hence, it is a progressive multilateralism. Just to add further to make it a bit more complete, our foreign policy also hinges quite a bit on the advocacy of the global south, which means that we being part of it, being a middle power, probably not in the higher rung among the middle powers, but still because of soft power and leadership, we punch, above our weight and call for this advocacy. There will be some basic issues involved in advancing the global south agenda. For example, climate issues, in terms of energy sustainability, talking about justice internationally, domestically, and in relation to all the matters relating to trade as well. All these areas are being pushed as part of our composite collective foreign policy.
Mm-hmm. Composite collective foreign policy. Now, yes. I guess when you talk about our foreign policy, I'd like to go back to what it'd be like for us years ahead. So what would be our biggest foreign policy challenge in years to come, or in, let's say, 5 years down the road?
That's a tough one. 5 years down the road, many things happen, but that's a valid question. I think among the biggest things we have to realize is the fluidity of geopolitics and the ever-changing nature of international trade. Like I said earlier, we are a trading nation. We will have to always be conscious and sensitive about the flux that goes on in terms of international trade. So what do? Traditionally, it has always been kind of like a fail-safe method, traditionally. Improve and enhance your trade, promote investment, go into the strength of the areas that we have, for example, in terms of the commercial areas of trade, of course, manufacturing. But projecting 5 years and even starting from now, I think the challenge has gone up another notch.
Gone up another notch.
Another notch, which is we need to really strategically diversify, and we need to make sure that we continue to be resilient against the forces and circumstances.
So, Dato', you said strategically move forward, and we need to be resilient.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Give us a small example of that. What area?
Energy. Technology.
Are we not serious enough about it?
We are serious, but we need to be even more circumspect about it, even in many ways more proactive, and which we are doing. You're talking about 5 years down the line. There's quite a bit related to this, which is why, in terms of diplomatic forums, just very recently, the Prime Minister, in the official visit, first in the case of the business summit or the Russian ASEAN summit in Kazan, we had some, in terms of reassurances about supplies from energy from Russia. But more importantly, in Ashgabat, from Turkmenistan, we secured two massive, in terms of oil wells for us to manage and handle. That talks about strategic, sustainable, long-term planning for energy supplies. That is one of the things that I was referring to.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've got about five minutes left, and I'd like to take a look at things that need more public attention or strategic issues at this point, which deserve a lot more public attention.
Public as well as, I suppose, in that sense, more awareness in terms of what we do. Yeah.
Right. But I always keep tying it back to, if we don't know the work that's being done by the government outside the country, we will never understand what it's like, especially in times like this, when we're going to the polls, when we're looking at going to the polls again, we need to understand the work that's happening on the outside, and how can we find a balance with this? I don't know if I've digressed from the question, though.
Not totally, but regardless whether it's the polls or not, these are the things that have to be translated into the domestic situation. Now, if we have a positive, active, non-alignment strategy with multilateralism in mind, advancing, we bring in two things, which is confidence in our system, that we are tied into the international system. We are not isolationists, even though we are non-aligned. And that would be translated into numbers, perhaps, in terms of increased investment, in terms of seeing political stability and therefore impacting on our fundamentals, improving our currency. All these things will hinge on, I mentioned the word diplomatic forays of the government, of the Prime Minister, led by the Prime Minister, to improve. In many ways, you could say this, he would be the biggest salesman in terms of the international situation for the economy of the nation, and that's how you translate it. It will take time in terms of getting through the information to let people. That will be perhaps very much in the area of communications, where it has got to go down. Yeah, we on our part as Track 2, ISIS Malaysia, we have to facilitate, to marshal the area of questioning, collate the necessary information, provide the strategic briefs so that the government itself eventually will know how to digest it and relay it to the publics, in this case, and the stakeholders. That much we can do. There are no guarantees here. Yeah, but always...
There's no guarantees.
There are no guarantees. I mean, we would be living in, some sort... We are delusional of everything, they can guarantee everything. But these are some of the positive steps we make in order to move the needle forward in terms of progress internationally, and therefore bring forward to the country.
Right. I guess before we end, one of the elephants in the room with regards to conversations that we have in any room is always something that's there but never talked about. The refugee, with all the problems happening around the world, there is, like you said, there's flux, it's fluid, there's an ongoing refugee crisis, or people migrating from one country to the next because of insecurity, instability, so on and so forth. Now, do you have conversations of this nature at something like APR, or even at the 39th
Well,
APR?
as you mentioned, migration is as old as mankind, I suppose. Yeah. Civilization would not have moved without migrations. But you have migrations, and then you have forced migrations, and you have migrations because, of fleeing from hardship, war, and things like that. We do have, you mentioned earlier, Myanmar. That would be among the topics, the Rohingyas, for example. The cost-benefit analysis in relation to a specific policy dealing with migration and particular publics of that sector. Ethnic issues, cultural issues, assimilation issues. Those are areas that are discussed quite robustly in the Asia-Pacific Roundtable.
In closing, what would be your call to Malaysians, also those making their way for the 39 APR, with regards to your message as the chairman of ISIS?
Well, our call is that log on to whatever social media that you can have in order to get your access to it. I have to say that we have been getting very encouraging response in many sense, oversubscribed. We have limited places, 400.
Congratulations.
It's about the max. Yeah. In future, we might want to even increase a bit more. Like I said, it's already 10 times over. We need to get this information, and thanks, for example, to interview like this, we hope that the message can go along and to see that this is not, an exercise in being self-referential, but it's an exercise in promoting understanding and the benefits of geopolitics and geoeconomics.
Right. Dato', thank you very much. Like I said before we even went on, I said it was a pleasure and an honor to speak to you. I say it again. Thank you so much for gracing the studios of Bernama, and we hope to have you in the studio once again. Hopefully we can make this a monthly affair right here on Bernama World. Thank you so much, Dato'.
The honor is mine, and thank you for having me.
Right. As the global landscape grows more complex, platforms like the Asia-Pacific Roundtable remain important in shaping dialogue, understanding, and, of course, strategic thinking. For Malaysia, staying engaged in these conversations will be key to navigating the challenges and opportunities which lie ahead. I'm Jared Ratnam. This has been The World on Bernama.